Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to our last session before Passover. I realized after I had finished talking about Passover last week that I probably should say something about the Seder before you see one, just in case you haven't seen a Seder before. And also, if you have seen one before, a lot of Jewish people don't necessarily know what a Seder what the original idea, let me put it that way, what the original idea of the Seder was supposed to be. So let me talk about that for a little bit, and then if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those questions. So I'll start by way of saying that there are many Christian churches who, sort of in the last couple of decades, Christianity has really started to embrace the idea that Jesus was Jewish and that his followers were Jewish. And so if you really want to understand more about Jesus and his world and his followers, you need to understand what Judaism is about. And partly because of that trend in the last few decades, but partly for other reasons, I guess, churches are interested in either seeing a Seder or putting on a Seder to represent what Jesus did with his disciples. Now, I'm not an expert in the New Testament, but I understand that at least according to one or two of the Gospels, it would seem that the Last Supper was the Passover Seder, or it might have been a rehearsal for the Seder, because I think it was the night before the Passover meal would have been eaten, whatever. The idea is that that was the time, and the question is, did Jesus do that at the Last Supper? So that is all by way of saying that when Jesus lived, the temple in Jerusalem still was functioning. It was still standing. It was still in a place where Jews gathered from all over the country to offer the Passover sacrifice. And therefore, we don't really know, actually, what a Passover Seder looked like at that time, because nobody wrote down history or description of what a Passover Seder looked like while the temple was still functioning. But the best guess of many scholars is that what was going on really was there was the Passover Lamb. First of all, we get where do we learn this from? We learn the instructions from the book of Exodus when the first Seder took place, when the Israelites were getting ready to leave Egypt. So God says, I want you to take a lamb. I want you to roast it. You can't boil it or bake it or do anything. It has to be roasted. You need to eat all of it that night. You can't leave anything over till the next day. And if by chance you leave some over to the next day, you have to burn whatever's left over because you're not going to eat anymore. And you should eat the lamb with matzah, that is unleavened bread, and with maror, bitter herbs. And that's pretty much all it says. And then it says, by the way, you're going to repeat this ceremony next year and every year after this to commemorate this great evening. And when your children come to ask you, what do you mean by this ritual? What are we doing this for? You should say to them, it's because God took us out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. So that's the only instructions that are actually found in the Torah for how to conduct a Seder, right? What I just said. You're going to eat certain foods, three things in particular: the Passover lamb, the bitter herbs, and the unleavened bread. And then it seems somebody's going to ask a question, probably your children, why are we doing this? And then you'll explain to them the meaning of the holiday and the ritual. So the centerpiece of the Seder meal in those days was the Passover lamb. It's sitting right in front of you. It was the main course for the meal. It's not in disguise. It's right. It's obvious what this is about. But then the temple's destroyed, and we don't bring sacrifices anymore. And so there is no Passover lamb roasted that we're supposed to eat that night and not leave anything over to the next day. So that was the main part of the deal. That was the main part of the evening. There's a gaping hole, this vacuum, where the main rituals were supposed to be. What do you do now? And as with so many other things that we had to struggle with after the temple was destroyed, we had our founding fathers, right? So it wasn't Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. We had the rabbis, the sages of that time, who were probably the Pharisees. And I know they don't get good press in the New Testament, but that's another story. Um, um, Jesus, in many ways, seems to have ideas that were similar to the Pharisees. Anyway, it was the Pharisees, right? The masters of the tradition. And they said, look, what we can do is we can go back to the biblical passages, and we can pull out and embellish those stories, and we can create a structure. And by the way, and here's the important part, we know what's going on in the rest of the world at this time. Maybe I mentioned this last week, that when wealthy people in the Greco-Roman world want to have a banquet, which is what this is, we're having a big banquet, a big feast, they call it a symposium. And it involves many different dishes, different kinds of foods. And they have glasses of wine, they drink wine, and they also pour out libations of wine to the god of wine, either Bacchus in the Roman world or Dionysus in the Greek world. And we toast the master of the house who invited us all to celebrate this big meal. And oftentimes it'd be a politician or a philosopher or a historian, or somebody would come and lead a discussion about some subject of interest. And people would lounge around, kind of like on TV. You might have seen some of these old movies where you see the ancient people reclining. They're not sitting on chairs, but there's like sofas, and they're reclining on the sofas and they're eating their grapes like this, right? So they're reclining because they're aristocratic and they can relax while they eat. By the way, if you're right-handed, you're obviously going to lean on your left arm because you're using your right hand to manipulate the food so you can eat, right? So all those things. So the rabbis took that symposium structure and they mined the biblical passages and rabbinic interpretations of those passages, and they created the Passover structure that we now call the Seder. Again, we don't think this is how it was done in Jesus' time. This really developed after the temple was destroyed. But the purpose of the Seder was to engage everybody in a conversation about the meaning of the holiday. And since the holiday was like the formative moment of our history when we were finally a free people, it's also an opportunity to discuss what it means to be Jewish. And at least twice in the Passover Haggadah, it says each participant is supposed to see themselves as if they personally came out of Egypt. And that can be understood literally, like you imagine what would it have been like for my ancestors to be slaves in Egypt and now I'm free. Or you can understand it figuratively, like in every generation, we entrap ourselves in various kinds of slavery, whether it's slavery to work or slavery to some ideas or worshiping a person or a politician, God forbid, or some other thing. In what ways do we want to free ourselves from this kind of slavery that we really have entrapped ourselves in, right? And that's part of our personal exodus from Egypt this year. So they really wanted to engage everybody at the table. So with that in mind, they tell a story about 4 sons, which we could now say 4 children. And they're all based on verses from the Bible. So one of the passages, as I said, was, what does this ritual mean to you, right? Your children will ask you when you're doing the Seder, what does this ritual mean to you? Well, the rabbis, again, they read every word of the Bible and no word is extra. So they ask the question, why does he have to say to you, right? What does this ritual mean to you? Maybe what he's saying by that is, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just, I just want to eat. And you're doing this whole thingamajig and I'm not interested. So what does it mean to you? Why is it so important to you? And so if he's excluding himself from the story of the Jewish people, you should wake him up to the idea that, no, this is your story too. I'm kind of putting it nicely as to what they said. But they called him the wicked son because he's excluding himself. Today, we might say he is a rebellious son or he's a teenager. Whatever. The point is, you have to engage him somehow. And then there's another child in a verse in Deuteronomy where your children will come to you and say, what are the laws and statutes and ordinances and judgments that God commanded us? Well, wow, since he seems to know 4 different words for law, statutes, ordinances, judgments, and whatever, he must be a really smart guy. So he's the smart son or the smart child. You should engage him in an intelligent discussion about what it means to be free from slavery in Egypt. And then there's another one where it says your child will say mazot, just 2 words, 2 short words, mazot. What is this, right? So he must be a simple child. He can only ask a simple question. So you have to explain it to him in simple language. And then there's another passage where it just says, you should tell your children on that day is for what God did for me when I came out of Egypt. And they didn't even ask a question. You're just explaining it, even though they didn't ask. So that must be a child who doesn't know how to ask questions. And for him, like, it's like 2 or 3 years old, he hasn't able to formulate questions yet. You need to, again, explain it in a way that he'll understand. And they took these 4 different questions or 1 non-question, and they put them all together and said, there's 4 kinds of people sitting at the Seder. You need to find a way to address all of the people sitting at the Seder. So that's an example. And we end up reciting that passage from the rabbinic literature about the 4 sons or the 4 children. They said somebody has to ask a question, and if nobody asks a question, and even if you're just sitting by yourself, the Talmud actually says this, even if you're only having a Seder for 1 person, it's just you need to ask yourself a question and then answer it, because somebody has to ask a question at the Seder. So this gave rise to the 4 questions, and it's sort of the way that the simple child has something to ask, right? And maybe he can't formulate a question, so you give him some questions to ask. And this actually works, because what typically happens at a Seder is whoever the youngest person at the Seder is, they're supposed to recite the 4 formula questions, right? You give that to the youngest child. And when they're 5 or 6 years old, it's a big thrill because they just learned it in religious school. And hopefully they even learned it in Hebrew, and they learned it to a melody so they can sing it. And they're, oh yes, I want to do the 4 questions. And it gives them something to do it and engages them in the Seder, right? It's really pretty cool. But as I've done a sermon about this before, if you don't have any young children at the table, what might happen is what happened to me. I'm like in college already, but maybe I'm the youngest one at the table. And they say, well, you're the youngest one. You say the 4 questions. It's like, I'm in college. I've been doing this for 15 years. It's boring. It's belittling. Why should I have to recite this, formula that I've known since I was 3 years old? And so the answer is, actually, nobody has to do it. The important thing was for somebody at the Seder to ask a real question, and this was the fallback position. If nobody has a question to ask, here's some questions you can get the conversation started with. Now, the truth is, the 4 questions has become such a staple, such an essential element of the Passover Haggadah, that when I suggest not doing the 4 questions, people gasp. What do you mean? It won't be a Seder if nobody asks the 4 questions. So people ask the 4 questions. In the Haggadah that I'm going to use, this is what it looks like, by the way. The Haggadah, oh, that's backwards. It shows up backwards on the thing there. The Haggadah that I'm going to use for the Zoom Seder Saturday night that hopefully you're registered for, it has actually a cat in the hat version of the 4 questions. So this is my solution. Rather than take out the 4 questions because it's boring, and because there's no kids at the table who are excited about doing the 4 questions, You can do some alternative version of the 4 questions. Let me see if I can find it really quickly for you here. There it is. You can see the cat in the hat in the picture there. By the way, the Dr. Seuss Foundation is still printing the Cat in the Hat book. Don't worry. You know, the 4 books they decided not to reprint anymore. You know, we're not big sellers anyway. Nobody remembers them anyway. But anyway, the Cat in the Hat, as this professor in University of Calgary in Canada, a Jewish professor, wrote an entire Haggadah based on Dr. Seuss. So he rewrote the Haggadah in Dr. Seuss style. And in the Haggadah that I'm using, they excerpted just the part of the 4 questions. And then when you get to the 4 children, you don't have to have sons anymore, right? So for instance, in the Haggadah that I'm using, the guy who wrote the Haggadah had it illustrated by his daughter. So she did the 4 daughters. You can, here, let's take a look at this for a second here. You can see the wise son has her face in the book, and the simple son is meditating, the simple daughter is meditating. The rebellious one has the rebellious, is rebelling over there, and then the one who doesn't know how to ask is kind of, I don't know, kind of tripping out there or something. I don't know. Anyway, or you can play around with whatever you think the four women are there. Or you could do the Marx Brothers. For you Marx Brothers fan, you could do the Marx Brothers as the 4 sons, right? Groucho is the wise son, and obviously Harpo is the one who doesn't know how to ask because he doesn't talk, right? So Chico is the kind of wiseacre son, and Zeppo was the simple son. Anyway, so you can kind of do kind of fun things rather than take out parts of the Haggadah. You can kind of do them in a fun kind of way. But the main thing is to really engage everybody at the Seder. Yes, Jennifer just posted in the chat box. If you haven't registered for my Seder yet, yeah, in fact, let me just do a share screen. You know what? And let's go here. And now I'm gonna, this is my, oh, that's not the right one. Nope, forget that one. Hold on one second. Let's go here. I'm gonna pull up a different screen here in a second. Stop share. Okay, now we're gonna try sharing it again. There we go. Okay, boom, there you go. This is our website. And if you go down, oh, you know what? Let me just reboot this. I'm having some weird situation with the internet today that it's not picking up pictures necessarily. Okay, so here's the top of our page. You scroll down to here where it says Passover. You click there. And here is, see, it's just, there we go. So first night Seder, your virtual Seder for all ages. That's mine. So you click here and you can register for the Seder. If you want to see the Seder for families with children that Rabbi Ford is doing Sunday night, you click on this one. And the virtual Seder for young professionals. Oh, is that Saturday? So I guess that's Saturday at 7:30. You can click there and watch that.
No, it's Sunday. That's a typo.
Okay, that's a typo. Okay, right. So, right, that's what I thought. Sunday.
Good catch.
It does say March 28th. So yeah, it's Sunday night. So she's doing an early Seder for families and a later Seder for young professionals. And then there's Passover to go. I think it's too late to sign up for the meals with this kitchen, but you can sell chametz over here the way I described. You can sell the chametz through Rabbi Strauss. Just put all your chametz in a cupboard and seal it up, and then sign this document here. You can, here's the programs that we're offering this week about Passover. And this is our Movements Passover guide about cleaning your kitchen and what's edible and not edible. It's a little more strict than I am. So if you're interested in lenient opinions, make sure to call me. Let me put my phone number in the, I'll put my phone number in the chat box in a second. Call me and I'll give you some lenient opinions. And Bitmoji escape room. Oh, yeah, we had that. That was kind of fun. And if you want to watch our services online, go click here. and other resources on the internet for Passover, click there. So that's what you would do for that. Let me stop sharing here, go to the chat box, and I'll put my cell phone number in. Okay, there. Okay, so feel free to call me. Emailing might be a little tricky. I'm just going to say that. I try to keep up with emails, but I'm not always successful. But if you call me, I'll definitely, if I'm not able to call you, I'll call you back. I can't take the call right away. So so that's kind of what I wanted to say about that. You'll see a Seder with those kind of ideas in mind. We're going to be doing hopefully a somewhat interactive Seder. We're assigning parts to some people who are registering in advance. And I'll be explaining the different elements of the Haggadah as we go through it. But I wanted to give you kind of a general overview. So now we have an opportunity for people to ask any questions at all about Passover or anything else.
Rabbi, can you explain the different plates and the setup of the Passover plate and
Yeah.
foods on it?
Yes, I can. Okay, hold on 1 second while I pull up a picture. I'm going to pull up a picture and I'll share a screen. Seder plate. Here we go. Boom. Let's take one that's kind of okay, there's one. Open it in Paint. Oh, that's not very big. That's cheating. How about this one? There we go. Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do is go back to here, share screen, Seder plate. Boom, there. Okay, that's a kind of a colorful Seder plate. And so what you have is there's usually 6 items on the Seder plate. Some Seder plates have 5. There are different reasons given for why there's a 6th item, which I'll explain why there is a 6th item in a minute, but different reasons given. One of them is Kabbalistic, that there's some mystical reason that's in the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. I'm not too up on Kabbalah, so we'll have to ask Rabbi Horowitz, who is our Kabbalah expert, why there might be 6 items on the Seder plate. There's another less mystical reason why there's 6 items on the Seder plate, and I can explain that. So here's the 6 items. So we said that there's 3 foods that you need to eat according to the Torah. One was the Passover lamb, but we don't do sacrifices anymore, so we don't do a Passover lamb. There are some people who specifically do have lamb at the Seder to remind themselves of the Passover lamb, and that's one way of thinking. The more common way, at least in the Ashkenazic world, that's the Jews from Germany, France, Poland, and Russia, where most of the Jews in America came from. The Ashkenazic view was specifically not to have lamb on the Seder plate, lest our neighbors think we're still doing sacrifices. And this year, it finally occurred to me why this difference of opinion might exist. Because inevitably in America, even in the 21st century, I will still get asked by some Christians, where do you do your sacrifices now? Or how do you do sacrifices without a temple? So apparently there's still not widespread knowledge that we haven't been doing sacrifices for 2,000 years. Whereas I guess in the Sephardic world, mostly under Muslim rule, it was just known that Jews didn't sacrifice. But in the Christian world, apparently not so well known. So we didn't want to confuse our neighbors and think we were doing sacrifices, so we wouldn't have lamb on the Seder plate. But even if you do have lamb, you still put some symbol of that lamb on the Seder plate, whether you're eating it or not. And that's what this is. The Hebrew word here is zroah, which means an arm. We call it a shank bone in English. The shank bone of the lamb is put on the Seder plate. If you're a vegetarian, people sometimes use a carrot to remind themselves of the shank bone. or some other, or a beet or something. The Chabad, which is the Hasidic sect, and they're from Poland originally, so they don't do lamb. They specifically use a chicken neck because nobody will confuse a chicken neck with any part of a lamb. So it symbolizes the lamb, but it's clearly not a lamb. That's this one. The other thing that was supposed to be on the Seder plate was the maror. That's this one over here. Maror means bitter herb. Here it's depicted as horseradish, but horseradish wasn't the original bitter herb. In fact, really, they wanted some kind of a leafy vegetable that would be bitter, not a root vegetable. We use the root of the horseradish for the bitter herb. But in Poland and Russia, they couldn't get leafy things still in the early spring. It was still too cold for the green things to sprout. So horseradish became the preferred bitter herb in that area. And so on many Seder plates, we still use horseradish. Here's a little known fun fact. You're not supposed to use stewed horseradish. And you say, well, who stews horseradish? Well, you can get now at Randall's and at HEB, at least in the Jewish neighborhood here in Meyerland, you can go to the refrigerated section and you'll see these jars of white and red horseradish. They're chopped up horseradish and it's stewed in vinegar. The red one has beets mixed in, so it's not quite as pungent. The beets help to dull the sharpness of the horseradish. So that's what everybody, including us, puts on our Seder plate for horseradish, but it's not supposed to be used because it's stewed. You're supposed to actually take the raw horseradish root and grate it. Now, if you do that, if you want to go the original fundamental way, I recommend grating it the night before. If you grate it just even a few hours before the Seder, it's really, really strong. So you have to be very careful with it. I mean, when you eat it, it's strong. If you let it sit out overnight, it loses a lot of that, again, the strength of the pungency of it. But we use the stewed one, and I'll explain why in a minute. So this is the maror. Usually people put horseradish here, but you could use a regular radish. Somebody suggested mustard greens in a conversation I had earlier last week. From what I've read, it seems like mustard greens would be a good substitute. May have been more like the original idea. Endives was one thing that's mentioned as a bitter herb. Okay, so that's this thing over here. What are these other things? This over here is charoset, which is a fruit nut chutney, and or fruit nut dip kind of a thing. So this really comes from the Greco-Roman symposium idea, that you would dip your vegetables in a sauce before you ate them. And again, if you go to a wedding banquet or other formal banquet, that's typically what they'll have the cut up vegetables and then different kind of salad dressings, French or Thousand Island or Roquefort or something, and you dip the vegetable in the sauce to make it tastier and you eat it. That goes back to Greco-Roman times. We put it on the Seder plate, and we've given all kinds of reasons for putting it there. So one reason is when you chop up apples, which is usually like apples and walnuts, and you mix it with some wine or grape juice and some spices, it looks a little bit like mud. And so one of the reasons for putting it on the Seder plate is it symbolizes the mortar that was between the bricks that we used when we were building the storehouses in Egypt. That's what it reminds us of. But the real reason for having it there is dipping particularly the bitter herb into it, again, to cut the sharpness of the flavor so it doesn't knock you over or give you a stomach ache, right? You mix it with a little bit something sweet, so it's palatable. And it was basically a dipping idea from the Greco-Roman world. So that's an addition probably from rabbinic times. And now we're going to come to karpas. Karpas just is a Greek word, means green vegetable. And this again comes from the Greco-Roman world. This was the appetizer. So before you get to maror, the bitter herbs, the very first thing you do is you have some appetizers. Again, in the Poland and Russia, they used parsley. So when I was growing up, and for many years after that, we had these little parsley sprigs, and we would dip them in salt water, which is not on the Seder plate here. It was another side dish over here, but it was another dipping thing, right? So the dipping goes back to Greco-Roman times, and we dipped it in salt water to remind us of the tears of slavery. But it's possible that salt water was just an inexpensive dip that we could use to give the parsley a little extra flavor. And again, if you're doing a banquet, you want to dip your vegetables in something before you eat them. So the karpas, this is the appetizer. I recommend not putting out little sprigs of parsley, but putting out, celery, carrots, potatoes, any other kind of vegetable that grows in the ground, as opposed to vegetables that grow on trees, because you say the blessing for vegetables that grow out of the fruit that grows out of the ground. So once you say that blessing, you can eat anything else for an appetizer. And I recommend putting out a big plate of appetizers, and not just the salt water and not just the charoset, but also the salad dressings to dip in. Okay, that's this item. Beitza. So let me talk about this. I'm going to get to this one last. The yellow one at the bottom, I'll do last. So beitza is an egg. I think I might have mentioned this. It's supposed to be a roasted egg. So you're supposed to put it in the oven to cook it, but don't just put a raw egg in the oven because it'll explode and make a big mess. So you have to hard boil the egg first, and then you put it in the oven for a minute or so. It gets a little brown around the edges. Why do you want it to be a roasted egg? What's not mentioned in the passage in Exodus about the Exodus from Egypt is another passage later in the book of Exodus where it says there's going to be 3 pilgrimage festivals. 3 times a year, Jews were supposed to go to Jerusalem to celebrate with God, a holiday, a festival. So one of them is Passover, and the other 2 are the Feast of Booths, Sukkot in the fall, and the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, which is 50 days after Passover. Those 3 times we were supposed to go to Jerusalem and go to the temple. And then God says in the book of Exodus, and when you come to see me, don't come empty-handed. It's kind of like, when you're invited to a fancy dinner at a friend's house, you bring something with you, like flowers or dessert or a bottle of wine, right? So God says, don't come empty-handed when you come to visit. So what does it mean, don't come empty-handed? Well, you would bring a sacrifice, and it would be another animal that would be slaughtered and then roasted. And then you would get most of the meat back, and you'd have to eat that as part of the meal for celebrating the holiday. So this is called the festival offering. So you now have 2 whole animals you're sacrificing for Passover, the Passover Lamb and the regular festival offering. And the festival offering is represented by this roasted egg, which is why it's roasted, because the festival sacrifice also had to be roasted. Now, in the old days, they didn't have refrigerators. So you have to eat all that food because it won't last the next day, right? It's got to be eaten or it'll go bad. And that meant that you probably invited several families to join you. And that's really, I believe, the origin for why we invite all these guests over to our home for a Seder meal, why it becomes a big deal with a lot of people, because that goes back to really temple times when you had to have a lot of people at the table to go through all this food. And as I always say, you might have heard me say this before, I assume they didn't just have roasted meat, right? Just like today, they had all the side dishes. So potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, and whatever else they would have. Maybe they didn't have the Texas side dishes, but whatever side dishes they ate them, and it was a much bigger feast than even just 2 animals. So now we've kind of explained the zeroah, the Passover lamb, the shank bone. We explained the beitza, which the roasted egg, which represents the other festival offering, the karpas, which are the cut up vegetables that are hors d'oeuvres, moror, the bitter herbs that the Torah requires that we have, and the charoset that we're dipping the moror in, the chopped up walnuts and apples to cut the bitterness. By the way, charoset is probably dozens of charoset recipes. If you Google charoset recipe, you'll find dozens and dozens of recipes. Jews in different lands made haroset differently. Some people made it with date paste, which will make it even sweeter. Some people used other kinds of fruits. So lots of different ways to make haroset. The one I haven't described here is the 6th item. These 5 items, the first 5 will be on every Seder plate. The 6th item that is added to most Seder plates is this one, Hazaret, which translates today as, it translated then as lettuce. And the reason it's there is that Hazaret was the preferred bitter herb. So now you've got 2 plates of bitter herb. You've got one called moror and one called Hazaret, which meant lettuce. By the way, if you talk to a modern Israeli today, they'll tell you that I'm wrong. Because apparently in modern Hebrew, Hazaret means horseradish, but that's just horse hockey. No, it's just it's a modern Hebrew misappropriation. It did not originally mean horseradish. In rabbinic Hebrew, Hazaret meant lettuce, probably romaine lettuce. Today in modern Hebrew, the word for lettuce is chasa. So they use a different word, and Hazaret they think is horseradish. But in rabbinic literature, this was lettuce, and the lettuce was the preferred bitter herb because it wasn't too bitter. In fact, nowadays it doesn't seem bitter at all. And therefore you could eat a lot of it, and you're supposed to eat a significant quantity of it, according to the rabbis, to count for having eaten bitter herbs. So here's what we do at our house. The Hazaret, the lettuce, doesn't really taste bitter. The horseradish is really bitter, but it's stewed, and so it doesn't really count for bitter herbs for rabbinic purposes. So what we do is we take some of the chopped up horseradish and we put it on a leaf of lettuce, and that way we eat both of them together and we get the best of both worlds. We get that bitter taste in our mouth, but we get to satisfy the commandment, the mitzvah, so to speak, with the lettuce, which is the preferred bitter herb anyway. And that's the 6 things on the Seder plate. I mentioned you also have salt water over here for dipping the parsley in, or whatever you're going to dip. And I recommend, again, putting out other dips after that. Keep the salt water to remind you of the tears of slavery, but then put out other dips to remind us of the freedom of and the banquet that this meal was supposed to represent. And then the other thing that's not on the Seder plate are the 3 sheets of matzah. So I'm going to end screen here. So there's 3 sheets of matzah. Normally for a Friday night, at the Friday night dinner, you have 2 loaves of challah, and the 2 loaves of challah represent the double portion of manna that fell in the wilderness when our ancestors were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Every day they would go out and get their portion of manna, but it would go bad at the end of the day. So the next day they'd have to go out and hunt for more manna, and the manna would be there, but they'd have to go and get it. But on Friday, according to the Torah, the double portion of manna fell, so extra manna fell, so they were able to collect a double portion, and it miraculously didn't go bad. So they would have it for Saturday as well, because God didn't want them to work on the Sabbath, and it was considered work to go out and collect to collect manna. So they got a double portion of manna on Friday. So in honor of that double portion of manna, we get 2 loaves of bread at the Friday night dinner. So that would explain why you've got 2 sheets of matzah, because it's a festival. Like the Sabbath, you're not supposed to work. So you're going to represent that double portion with the 2 sheets of matzah. Why do you need 3 sheets of matzah? And the answer is because at the very beginning of the service, you're going to crack the middle one in half and hold up the half loaf and say, "This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt." Why is it cracked in half? Because slaves don't get whole loaves of bread. They only get crumbs, right? They only get a portion. So we crack it in half and say, this is what our ancestors used to eat. They only get a partial loaf. They didn't get a whole loaf. But since you cracked it in half, it's not a whole loaf anymore. So when you get the hamotzi later, you still need 2 whole sheets, right? So that's why you've got 3 sheets. One you can crack in half and you still have 2 left over. That's a whole lot more information than most probably Jewish people know. Anyway, all right, next question.
Rabbi, can you go over the Afikoman?
Oh, the Afikomen. Great question. Okay. So one of the things, first I'll tell you where it came from, and then I'll tell you why we do it. Okay, so Afikomen, first of all, not a Hebrew word. Comes from Greek. And fortunately for us, there are some English words that have morphed from the same Greek origin. So epi, it means after. So an epilogue, right? The epilogue of a book is the after word. Logos means word, right? So epilogue is the afterword, what comes at the end of the story, right? That's epi, so after. And komos meant came into English as comedy, right? Revelry. So epikomen was the after dinner revelry. There's an argument among scholars as to what exactly that after dinner revelry was. It seems that it was a Greek custom that after they had this big fancy banquet, they would then go around the neighborhood and bother the neighbors and try and get them to party with them, either eating more and drinking more or doing something. So that's one possibility, after dinner revelry with some neighbors. Or it was some kind of after dinner, like a dessert, a big fancy sweet aperitif or something, or more drinking, something like that. So the after dinner revelry was some kind of either a dessert, fancy dessert, or more wine. Now, what the rabbi said in the Mishnah was, when you get to the end of the Seder, they said, Ein maftirin achar hapesach afikomen. That's the Hebrew words. We do not conclude after the Passover Lamb with afikomen. We do not do the afikomen at the end. That's what they were trying to say. After you ate the Passover meal, the Pesach, right? After you finish the Passover meal, we do not do this afikomen thing that the Greeks do. Yes, we modeled some of this meal after the symposium that our neighbors are doing, but we don't do that. That's too far. That's just too crazy. We're not going to go wild and crazy and party, get drunk, and do all kinds of other nutty things that they do, right? So after we're done with our Passover meal, that's the conclusion of the dinner. That was the original statement. So, so the last thing, so it was understood that the last thing you're supposed to do is actually eat the Passover lamb, because it said achar ha-pesach. So they took it literally, not just the Passover meal, but actually the Passover lamb itself. The last thing you do is the last thing in your mouth, the last taste in your mouth is a taste of that Passover lamb, the taste of freedom. That's what they wanted you to go to sleep with, right? That taste of freedom in your mouth. And but then it also said in the Torah that you're supposed to eat that Passover lamb with matzah and bitter herbs. So presumably the last taste in your mouth was the Passover lamb with matzah and bitter herbs. And then the temple's destroyed and we're not eating the Passover lamb anymore. So now the last thing we're going to eat is a piece of matzah. Forget the bitter herbs. We want you to taste freedom. So the matzah also represents freedom because the dough didn't have enough time to rise as we left. So the last taste in your mouth is going to be the matzah. And somehow that last taste of matzah in your mouth came to be called afikomen, to remind us that we're not doing that other afikomen thing, the after dinner revelry that our pagan neighbors are doing. So the matzah that reminds us not to do afikomen came to be called the afikomen. Now, again, you know a lot more than most Jews know about the afikomen. Then another custom developed, right? You want to engage everybody at the Seder table. So you've got little kids and they're getting anxious and they're squirmy and they don't want to sit around and I want to go play video games or something. So how do you keep them engaged in the Seder to the end? You create a game. And the game there's two variations to this game. It's called Hide the Afikomen. The variation 1 is the owner of the house, the master of the one person who's running the Seder. Could be the husband, could be the wife, could be one of the, who knows, whoever's running the Seder, cracks at the beginning, cracks that middle piece of matzah in half, holds up the smaller half and says, "This is the bread of affliction our ancestors ate," and hides the larger half. Not right away hides it, but like sticks it in a napkin or a pouch or something and sets it aside. And that's going to be the afikomen. And then sometime during the course of the meal, when the kids aren't looking, the person who's running the Seder takes that napkin or pouch with the afikomen matzah and hides it somewhere. And then at the end of the meal, and the kids know this is coming, they say, "Well, we have to end the meal. The last thing we're supposed to eat is this afikomen, and I don't know where it went. It disappeared. Somebody's going to have to find it." So the kids go looking all around the house, and whoever finds it gets a prize, right? So this is a game that you can keep the kids engaged with to the end of the meal. The search for the afikomen. That's variation 1. Variation 2 is you crack it in half, you set it in the pouch, and then at some point in time, the person who's running the Seder finds an excuse to leave the table for a while. And while that person is gone, the kids take the afikomen and they hide it. And then it comes to the end of the meal, and the person who's running the Seder says, "Let's have the afikomen. Oops, not there. I wonder where it went." And the kids say, "We know where it is. We have it, but we won't give it to you unless you give us a prize." So they're basically holding it for ransom. And you then have to give them a prize. And the point is you have the afikomen come out at the end, and then you can finish the meal with the afikomen. That's the real story of the afikomen. Any other questions? It doesn't have to be about Passover. It could be about anything.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I've seen people mention kosher and strict kosher as things. What's that about?
Yeah, that's because, there's a game some people play about so I gotta put myself back in the center here. I don't know how, would you guys oh wait, all right, anyway. Okay. Well, kosher and strict kosher. So there's a tendency, particularly in the last several decades, I think, for people to try and outdo each other with being more strict than their next door neighbor is. I'm not sure how this became. I guess there's a sense of one-upsmanship or maybe OCD. I'm a little OCD myself sometimes, so I understand that. But they want to be like, extra strict. My current view about keeping kosher is that if there are serious people who, they're not just making stuff up, but based on interpretation of sources, are saying that something is kosher, I think we should go with that. I don't think that we should make kosher laws more difficult than they need to be. That's just me. So I'll give you a couple examples of where this can come up. So one is with bugs. Not too many Americans anyway, want to eat bugs. And I vividly remember this when I was a child, and my dad was washing lettuce. And I asked him, "Why are you washing lettuce?" And it turned out one time when he would take the leaves off separately and he'd wash them in the water. And he took a leaf off, and sure enough, there was a fly in the lettuce. A fly. You could see it it was not hard. It was hard to miss. A fly was in the lettuce. And he said, "This is why I wash the lettuce." And I went, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. We don't want to eat bugs." So there is a prohibition, in kashrut. You're not supposed to eat bugs. So you have to wash your vegetables. But there are some people who go to, like, in my opinion, extreme lengths to wash their vegetables. and may not even eat at all certain vegetables because they say there's just no way to make sure that you've gotten rid of all the little bugs. They say this about broccoli. I mean, I wash broccoli, I look at broccoli, I don't see any bugs. I'm not using a magnifying glass. I'm not like examining it like really closely with the microscope, but I don't see bugs in the broccoli. And there is a view that says that, you know, you only have to get rid of bugs that you can see with the naked eye. Our ancestors didn't wear glasses. They didn't have glasses back then. If they're like me, they wouldn't see bugs even if they were bigger. I'm at least looking at the lettuce with glasses on. And I'm not going to search with a microscope or a magnifying glass to see what's there. I just don't think that was the purpose of it. But that's when they say, that's one example of that. There are people who are concerned with well, I don't know. I'll leave it at that for now. But there's different levels of people keeping kosher, and some people, for instance, will read the ingredients on a label, on a food label, and if they don't see anything in the ingredients list that is a problem for kashrut, they will eat them. And a few occasions I do that myself. I used to do it more frequently, but for instance, cheese, particularly in America, if you're a cheese aficionado, it's very hard to get the fancier varieties of cheese kosher in America. In Israel, it's a lot easier because the cheese store, that's all kosher. And so all the varieties are made kosher. But in America, it's very hard to get these fancy varieties to be supervised by a rabbi. So what I'll do is I'll just look at the ingredients. And here's another example with cheese, by the way. The coagulating agent, what makes cheese from milk, is something called rennet, or that's what's used in most cheeses, is rennet. Rennet comes from the stomach lining of a cow. So that's just how cheese was traditionally coagulated, with the lining of a stomach from a cow. Now you might say, well, you're not supposed to mix meat and milk. So how do you make cheese if you're taking the lining of the stomach of the cow to make cheese out of milk? It seems to be mixing meat and dairy. But for halachic reasons, that was not considered meat. So that wasn't the problem with rennet. The problem with the rennet was, did it come from a properly slaughtered cow? So kosher cheese was made with rennet that comes from a kosher slaughtered animal. Our movement about 60 years ago now looked at the way cheese is produced and manufactured in modern factories today. And they sort of kind of use the stomach lining of a cow, but it's basically bleached and mixed with chemicals, and it's like it goes through this chemicalizing process where they turn it into liquid drops of coagulating agent. And there's actually a term for this in Jewish law. It's called a davar chadash, a new thing. They have so transformed what it originally was into this new thing that it's completely not even related to what it was before. And because it's a davar chadash, a new thing, that's a category in Jewish law, it's not a problem. You don't have to get it from a kosher animal. And it wasn't just our movement that said that. There actually was an Orthodox rabbi in Europe who ruled that way. But again, some people want to be more strict than everybody else. And so the prevailing opinion in the Orthodox world is, if it's not kosher rennet, it's not kosher cheese. So one of the differences between kosher cheese and not kosher cheese is the rennet. Nowadays, a more recent opinion from our movement said they don't even use rennet. They don't even use the stomach lining of a cow anymore. They can now produce it chemically. It's a microbial rennet. They have microbes growing and produce the enzyme that coagulates the cheese. So it's not even from a cow anymore, and therefore should not be a problem. So I will buy cheese based on the ingredient list because I want some of these fancier varieties sometimes, and it's not available in a kosher form. Any other questions? You end up learning a lot about the food industry when you're keeping kosher.
In the chat, can you go over the cups of wine, please?
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry, I haven't been paying attention to that. 4 glasses of wine. Okay, let me go over that. For that, I have another picture. So let me just find the picture first. Oh, come on, guys. Okay, let me, this will take 1 second. I'm gonna pull it up from another source. Uh, 1 second. Yeah, there it is. Okay, hopefully this will show up close enough. Let me go back to Zoom, share screen. I don't know if this is going to be big enough to see. Can you see there's 4 cups there? So it's based on Exodus chapter 6. I believe it says verse 6. Let me just take a close look. Chapter 6, verse 6 of Exodus. There's 4 verbs that are used when God says to Moses, I'm going to take the Israelites out of Egypt. He says, I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. So bring you out. Bring is the first verb. I will rescue you from slavery. Rescue is the second verb. I will redeem you. That's the third verb. And I will take you as my people. Take is the fourth verb. So one of the reasons we have 4 cups of wine is to remind us of the 4 ways that God used to describe how we were going to be taken out of Egypt. That's a sort of a midrashic interpretation, a moral interpretation of it. But there is another reason why we do it. That 2 of the glasses of wine come before the meal and 2 of the glasses of wine come after the meal. The first one is for Kiddush. That's the one that we do like every festival, every Friday night, we make Kiddush. So that's the first glass. The one at the end we do over Birkat Hamazon, the grace after the meals. And when you're having a big fancy banquet, it's traditional to have a glass of wine at the end of the meal as well to say the grace after the meals. So then we added 2 more glasses of wine as sort of toasts to God. And the second one we kind of lift up and put down. And at the end is we also do various songs of praise. So those are glasses of wine that would be like at a banquet where you're toasting the bride and the groom, or you're toasting the master of the house. And in this case, we're making a toast to God. You know, the reason why we're celebrating is that God freed us from slavery. So that's that. Now, in that passage, Exodus 6:6, the next verse says, and I will bring you into the land, the promised land. I'll bring you to the land flowing with milk and honey. And bring you in is a 5th verb. And so there was an argument among the rabbis whether we should have 5 glasses of wine based on this midrash, right? Maybe we should have 5 glasses of wine because there's really 5 verbs. Or do we say, no, since it's a separate verse that had the fifth verb, it shouldn't really be added. And because we couldn't decide, we set aside a full glass of wine on the table for Elijah, right? So the glass of Elijah is there because we couldn't decide whether we were supposed to drink it or not. Now, why Elijah? So a couple things about Elijah. First of all, Elijah in the Bible doesn't say he actually died. It says he went up to heaven in his chariot or whatever. So, so the rabbis said, well, he didn't die. He's actually still alive up in heaven. And before the Messiah comes, Elijah will come back to earth and tell us that the Messiah is coming, right? So when Elijah comes back, it's a sign that the Messiah is coming. And that's one of the reasons why we open the door for Elijah at the end of the Seder, because the Passover is the holiday of freedom. And we're hoping that there will be ultimate freedom for everybody in the world, that the world will be fully redeemed on Passover. What would be a better time than that for the world to be finally everybody at peace and freedom and dignity? So we pray every year that at Passover, God will make a miracle happen and the Messiah will come and everybody will be redeemed. And so we pray that as Elijah will come and visit us. We open the door and say, come on in, Elijah, and bring in the Messiah. So that's one aspect where we're doing there. The second thing is this cup for Elijah. And there's several times in the Talmud, there would be disputes in a matter of law, and they couldn't decide whose opinion to follow. And most of the time they took a majority vote and they decided according to the majority. But sometimes they had this dispute that they couldn't decide. And so they said, well, when Elijah comes, he will answer all these difficult questions for us, right? We'll leave it up to Elijah to tell us which way to go. So this fifth cup of wine became Elijah's cup because we're going to invite him into the Seder and he's going to come and he'll tell us whether we're supposed to drink that fifth cup or not. And since it's the fifth cup of redemption and the coming of the Messiah, since Elijah is going to come before the Messiah comes, obviously we're going to drink that fifth cup of wine when he comes. So that is about the 5 cups. Miriam, okay, cup for Miriam. I'm just going to end with this because Diane just entered the room here. So some people, this is like a part of our new egalitarian view of the world, that men finally waking up and realizing that women are half of the world. There's a tradition of putting a glass of water on the table for Miriam. And the reason for that is Miriam was Moses' sister. And in the Torah, it says that when they first left Egypt, they complained that there was no water to drink. So Moses got them water. And then at the end of the journey in year 40, they complained again that there was no water. There's no water to drink. So Moses got them water. But in the intervening 40 years, they didn't complain. So why didn't they complain? Turns out that Miriam died in the paragraph of the chapter before the second time they complained that there was no water. So the midrash was that it was Miriam who provided them with water for 40 years. Everywhere they went, in honor of Miriam, there was always a well of water. When she died, that well disappeared. And so in honor of Miriam, who was also involved in the Exodus from Egypt, she's the one who danced with the women with timbrels, singing Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, God amongst the mighty. And she also had this magic well that followed the Israelites. We could have a glass of water on the table for Miriam. No eating fat and blood. Blood represents the life of the animals, so we're not supposed to have blood. And the kind of fat we're not supposed to eat is called suet in English. It's a special kind of fat. You can still have your ribeye steak, I think. It's just the suet fat that you're not supposed to eat. That's easily removed from the meat. Okay, and now I have to leave. Thank you for all the exciting questions. I hope this was interesting. You've learned hopefully some things that a lot of Jews don't know. And I'm going to turn the class over to Diane.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Morgen.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Make Diane a host. Oh, she is a host. Okay, good. Adios.
Bye.
Adios.
להתראות. Shalom.
Hello, good morning. Shalom.
It's good to see you. מה נשמע? טוב?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, ככה, ככה. Oh, Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. This year, I find myself often saying Baruch Hashem because I feel like I must be grateful for everything. Even though it's a tough year, I have to be grateful for my health and the health of my friends and family. So Baruch Hashem. Thank you, God.
Mhm.
Okay, so plowing ahead. We're just moving forward and not backwards in our book. Let's just very, very quickly do our Olifette song. Here we go. Olifette, fet.
Aleph, Bet,
Gimel, dalet, hey.
Gimel, Aleph, Hey,
Vav, zayin, chet, tet.
Vav, Zayin, Tet, Tet,
Yod, kaf, chaf.
Yud, Kaf, Kaf,
Lamed, mem, nun.
Lamed, Mem, Nun,
Samech, ayin, pei, fei.
Samet, Pei, Pei,
Sadi, kuf, resh.
Sadi, Kuf, Resh,
Shin, sin, tav.
Shin, Sin, Tav.
Okay, and now let's read each of the vertical rows, columns, I guess is called. Let's read each of the columns down with the names of the letters, starting with the Aleph column, okay? Here we go. Aleph, A, Yud, Mem, Ayin, Sadi,
Sadi,
Sofi,
Sofit,
Tav.
Tav.
Next column, Bet. Here we go. Bet,
Bet,
Vav,
Vav,
Kaf,
Kaf,
Mem, Sofi, Hey,
Mem, Sofit, Pei,
Kuf.
Kuf, Tav.
Okay, third column. Bet,
Bet,
Zion, Kaf,
Zayin, Kaf,
Nun, Pei, Resh.
Ayin.
Okay, Gimel, Tet,
Gimel, Tet,
Kaf, Sofi, Nun, Sofi, Pei, Sofi, Shin. Okay,
Shin.
Dalet,
Dalet,
Het, Lamed,
Lamed,
Samech,
Tameh,
Sadi,
Sadi,
Sin.
Sin.
Okay, so I'm not going to actually ask you to do it, but how many of you think that with not too many mistakes, you could do this Olifette chart?
I think
I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So that's what I'd really like you to be able to do. Maybe you could work on that over Passover break. Is really work hard on being able to read this chart in every direction. Could cheat.
Teacher,
Yes.
are we having? No. So there's no class next week and the next week?
Right, because of Yontiv, because of
Okay.
Passover. However, if you'd like, I could record a class for you.
And what about with Rabbi Morgen? There's no
No,
class either.
because next Sunday and the Sunday after that is Yontiv.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
for that reason, there won't be.
Mm. I was wondering and ask the Rabbi Morgen, but I didn't have the bravery to ask him. Sometimes I feel like I'm not gonna be prepared enough. Like when, for example, when it's time to go to the bed din and it's like I wonder. Say, oh my goodness! I hope I be prepared and stuff like that.
Well, I don't know if he's told you, but I can tell you a couple questions that they often ask.
Yeah.
One question that they often ask is, what's your favorite holiday and why?
Oh,
And
okay.
so you should be prepared not just for my favorite holiday is, but also to explain why. And they also might ask you, what observances do you enjoy doing at home,
Mhm, okay,
they might ask you how often you go to services. Obviously, this year it would be Zoom services.
right,
So
okay.
things like that. They might say, "What's your favorite prayer?"
Oh,
That might be a question that they ask.
all
So I'm
right.
just throwing out because I've occasionally gone to those as a
Uh-huh.
witness for the
Uh-huh.
mikvah. So when I've gone, I've heard some of the questions that they ask, and those are very common questions. Oh, and here's another question: how does your family feel about your choices? They
Oh,
might
okay.
ask you that.
All right.
Does that
Thank
make you
you.
feel more comfortable, giving you a little to work on there?
Yes, thank you, Robert. Nothing. Thank you. Thank you, teacher.
Okay, so let's get back to practicing. So I would love for you to be able to do this Olifette chart in every direction, because that would mean that you really recognize all of your letters. And one thing that you could do is you could make a copy of this, cut it into little squares and use them like flashcards, right? You could write write the names of the letters on the back of them and use them like flashcards, or you could make a copy that's blank like it is in your book, and then make another copy. I think I once posted online that's filled in, but you could fill it in anyway yourself, and then practice going back and forth from one chart to the other until you can recognize all the letters. And then
Mhm.
say the other thing for extra credit is to be able to do the last page and to be able, most importantly, to say the names of these vowels. And how would be the best way to do that? It would be to memorize the words that they use in the examples. Right? If you memorize that this symbol at the top goes with in father, then every time you see this, you can say in your head, like father. Okay, so I would love for you to memorize sounds for all the vowels. That would be another project to do in these next 2 weeks. Right, and I'm willing to bet that if you spent 10 minutes a day on it, that in 2 weeks you could have the vowel sounds memorized. You probably already know at least half of them. And then
All right.
people who are geniuses can memorize the names of all the vowels.
Okay.
Okay. So for now, let's go down the symbols for the vowels and do our best. So I'll say the name of the vowel. Oh, I'll tell you what, I'll say the Q, that Q name that they have at the beginning. And you say this sound of the vowel, okay? Father, father. And then for the third one, I don't really like what they put down as an example. So I'm going to say the word sit. So you can write sit, sit. For the third vowel, for shva, write in the word S-I-T. Okay, sit. Okay, father. B. Open. 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 Bed. Bed. Eight. Moose. And moose. Okay, very good.
Okay, I have a question on shuruk and kibbutz because both of them sounds like ooh. It's not but the one on kibbutz is supposed Isn't the sound more like longer, like ooh, like that? Or
To my knowledge, I think probably what happened with these two different symbols is there's a certain amount of melding of Semitic languages, and I'm imagining that some transcriptions were imported in. But I could be wrong about that. If you come up with some research that I'm not familiar with, please let me know. When I
Okay.
was studying Hebrew, and I studied with a professor from Hebrew University, and she never brought that up in our group as there being a differentiation, but I could be wrong about that. So
Okay.
if you discover something, please tell me.
I don't know.
But I do know
yes,
that
yes.
there was a melding of different traditions when it came
Okay.
to the written language. And of course, the vowels were added much, much later.
Okay.
So the vowel, the shuruk, was written in at a much earlier period of time. It appeared as a vav, but we knew to pronounce it as u. And that's much older in terms of Hebrew transcription than the kibbutz, which
Okay.
the Masoretes added right in the somewhere between the year 400 and 600. They added that
Okay.
transcription in. Okay.
Okay. Toda Rabba Mora.
Alo davar, toda. Okay. Okay. Let's go to Amud Shivim Vishtayim. Amud Shivim Vishtayim, page 72. Okay, on page 72, we have some final forms, which we call sofit, right? So we have nun and nun sofit, sadi, sadi sofit, mem, mem sofit. Okay, so let's go to line 1. And can you just take a moment to circle any sofit forms that you see on line 1?
Two.
There are 2 sofit forms. I'm going to read the phrase, and then I hope you can read it after me. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Can someone read that for us?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Et wait. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
That was very good. I would put a little, when I transliterate the Sadi, I transliterate it usually as TS, although I've seen TZ. And the reason I do TS is it sounds exactly like TS at the end of a word in English, like beats, right? Do you hear the word beats? The TS sound. So, haaretz.
Haaretz.
Good. That was very good reading. Very good. Okay, what about on line 2? What sofit letters do we have?
Nun Sofit.
Nachon, nun sofit, nun sofit. I'm going to read the sentence and then I hope someone else can read it for us. He mitzion tetzei Torah. He mitzion
Mitzion
tetzei Torah.
Torah.
Rina, do you want to read it?
Ki mitzion tzetzeh Torah.
Okay, woo.
It's easy because you already said it.
Yes, well, it's good to, well, I think learning to read is partly sounding out words and partly just remembering words, right? You have to have both.
Okay.
So, because you don't want to have, who has the energy to sound out every word every time they read? Hopefully, after seeing them a bunch of times, you remember. Line 3, how many final letters do we have in line 3? How many sophites?
2.
2. What are they?
Mem and Nun.
Tov. Nachon. Correct. Vayarem keren le'amo. Vayarem keren le'amo. Can somebody read that?
I will.
Thank you.
Va'arem keren la le'amo.
Good. Vayarem keren le'amo. Tov ma'od. Okay, line 5. Okay, let's see. I have to count 2. How many final sophites do we have?
2.
2. That's what I think. And what are they?
Mem and Sadi.
Mem and Sadi. That's right. Bashamayim mima'al ve'al ha'aretz mitachat. In the heavens above and on the earth below. Bashamayim mima'al ve'al ha'aretz mitachat. Okay, line 6. Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. How many Sophite consonants do we have here?
3.
3.
3.
2.
Not a lot of variety, right? So can you just all repeat after me? I'll do 2 words at a time. Asher hotzeti
Asher hoseiti
etchem me'eretz
ethem me'eretz
Mitzrayim.
Mitzrayim.
And we chant this. Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem. Does anybody know what verse shows up that I just chanted? Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem emet emet. It means I'm the one who brought you out from the lands of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai, your God. It's the end of a very famous prayer. Does anyone want to guess? It's okay if you don't guess.
I don't.
It's the end of the Shema prayer. It's the very
Oh,
Shema prayer.
oh, that's easy. But I don't know it.
It's hard to learn. It's hard to hear stuff out of context, isn't it?
Right.
Our mitzvah teacher, and you teach it like 30 or 40 times a week, in addition to praying yourself. You can take any line. And okay, now we're going to start verse 20, which makes me so happy. We're really close to the end of the book now. Can anybody say what our core word for the week is? What is it?
What?
On page 73. Somebody said it. What is it?
73.
What's that word?
Israel.
Israel.
Nachon. Yisrael. And the letter that's slightly confusing is the second letter, which looks like a shin, except the dot is on the left. And that makes it sin, right?
Right.
I
Sin.
remember sin because they always say that left-handed people were sinful, and the dot is on the left-hand side, so it's sin.
Oh, there's a word, I think it's either Italian or Spanish. It's probably Italian for left. Sinistra, is that Italian?
Yeah.
Yes, siniestra.
Sinistra. So,
Spanish, we also have that word, but it means something really bad, like scary, like
oh,
yeah,
sinister.
yeah, right.
Well, so I use it because sinistra means left, and the dot is on the left, and the sound of sinistra is S. So I studied Italian like over 40 years ago, but I do remember that vocabulary word, sinistra. So Yisrael. At any rate, somebody said it also means lefties are sinful, and the dot is on the left. We all know it's not true. So let's remember it as lefties are not sinful. Okay, let's remember it that way, because Rabbi Morgen, my beloved husband, who's a very good guy, is a lefty. Okay?
Oh,
Lefties are not sinful.
The smart one.
Okay. But we'll remember that the dot on the left is for not sinful. Okay. All right. So let's jump right to the reading, because we've been doing a lot of reviewing the Olifette. So on the first line, they're being very nice and not tossing in any shins. It's all sins on the first line, on line 1. So let's try to read it together. Line 1. Sa, si, say, so, say, say. Very good. Okay, line 2, they're going to mix us up. So they're going to have shin. How do we know it's a shin if the dot is on the right? So here we go. Shay, say, she, see, show.
Ah, damn, they mixed me
Oh,
up.
they fooled me. So, show. See, I'm as susceptible as anyone. Okay, line 3. Okay, let's just start by saying in each word whether it's shin or sin. So, in the first word, it is sin. Second word, sin. Third word, sin. Fourth word,
sin.
Okay, they won't be able to trick us here. Here we go. Line 3, let's read together. Nismach,
Nismach,
Asep,
Asep,
Samtem,
Samtem,
Pores.
Pores.
Good. Line 4. Let's just do the sin and letters again. So we have sin,
Sin,
sin, sin, sin. Once again, they're not going to fool us here. So here we go. Sefatai,
Sefatai,
ve'yitnasei,
Be'idnasei,
ya'aseh,
Ya'aseh,
ismach.
Yismach.
Okay, let's see. Word power. Find and circle the Hebrew for these numbers above. Sheva is 7. Eser, 10. Shemone Esrei, 18. Okay. And then we're going to look for 2 words. We're going to underline Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael means the land of Israel. Okay. Well, I kind of feel like we should start at the beginning just so that we don't miss any possible numbers. Okay. So I'll just read and you can echo after me starting on line 1, okay? Se.
Se.
See where I am? Page 74,
Yes.
line 1. Se.
Se.
Sim.
Siim.
Sar.
Sar.
Sam.
Sam.
Sak.
Sak.
Si. Line 2. Sarah. Dane.
Sane.
Samach.
Samach.
Eser.
Eser.
Ose.
Ose.
Masa.
Masa.
Okay, what word on line 2 is a number?
Eser.
Eser, right. And what number is Eser?
7.
10. 10.
Oh,
10. Eser. And, you know, in slang, I don't hear people saying this anymore, but when you wanted to praise somebody, you used to say, oh, they're a 10. That goes with this really stupid movie from the 70s or the 80s or something. But so when I was young, Eser was used as slang in the United States. We would say that's a 10. And in Israel, you would say Eser. And so Eser meant something or somebody who was really great. They are number 10. Okay. Number 3. Shara.
Shara.
Sarah.
Sarah.
Shama.
Shama.
Sama.
Sama.
Sha'ar.
Sha'ar.
Sason.
Satson.
Good. Good. Line 4. Se'ar.
Se'ar.
Sachar.
Sachar.
Safa.
Safa.
Yisa.
Yisa.
Basar.
Basar.
Sechel.
Sechel.
And sechel is a nice word to know because Jewish grandparents will often say about their kids or their grandkids, don't you have any sechel? Sechel is like sense or common sense is sechel. So although you could say that it's used in positive ways, it's often said in the negative, like somebody doesn't have any seichel. They don't have any sense. And right, and so it's something that older people say. All right, line 5. Sadeh.
Sadeh.
Hashat. Sheva. Eser.
Sheba.
Asa. Hayish. Okay, what numbers do we have in line 5?
7 and 10.
Right, we have Sheva, Eser. Sheva, 7, and Eser. Good. Sheva is an important one because after all, there's 7 days in the week. That's kind of a motif in Judaism. It's like 7 is like a big number in Judaism. So Sheva is good to know. Okay. Line 6. Simchat
Simchat
Torah.
Torah.
Shemone
Monem.
Esrei.
Esrei.
Aseret
Aseret.
Hadibrot.
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 Right. Okay. One group of these words is a holiday. There are 2 words that together are the name of a holiday. Which 2 words are the name of a holiday?
Torah Simchat.
Right. Simchat Torah. We always do it backwards. So instead of saying, well, I guess you could do it either way, but Simchat Torah, which is joy of Torah, or, the joyfulness of Torah, right? That's a holiday. Does anybody know what the Shemona Esrei is?
There's a
Esrei?
prayer. There's a prayer at like in the afternoon
Well, it's done
or
3
in
times
the
a day.
3
It's
times a day.
twice out loud and once silently. And in the evening is when we do it silent. So we do it out loud in the morning and the afternoon, and then silently in the evening. It's what we sometimes refer to the day Amidah, ending prayer, as the Shemona Esrei, referring to the number of blessings in the weekday Amidah. And here's a tough one. What are the Aseret Hadibrot? First of all, what is Aseret version of a number? What number do you think Aseret is a version of?
7.
If you look, it has Ayin,
7,
Sin, Resh. It has Ayin, Sin, Resh. What number has Ayin, Sin, Resh?
10.
10.
10. So what do you think the Aseret Hadibrot are? I think very important in Judaism that is 10, that we have 10.
The 10 Commandments.
The 10 Commandments, right. So we don't actually call in Judaism, we don't call the 10 Commandments the 10 Commandments. We call them like the 10 statements, right? Dibroter, like statements, or I've even seen it translated horribly as utterances, but this is utterances. So it's like 10 statements, right? 10 statements of law. Aseret Hadibrot. Okay, line 7. Okay. Repeat after me. Shema Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael.
Sim Shalom.
Sim Shalom.
Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom.
Okay, so what does Shema Yisrael mean?
Isn't that
Hear Israel.
Listen Israel.
Yes, either listen Israel or hear Israel, and a lot of prayer books have a very grand translation, kind of old-fashioned. Hear, O Israel, which is very sort of high English. Hear, O Israel, but basically, listen Israel or hear Israel. Okay. Sim Shalom is the name of a prayer. Does anybody have a sense of what that might be?
Oh, I thought that was the prayer book, right?
It's also the name of a prayer book because we like the concept. We named a prayer book after it.
Oh.
Well, what does Shalom mean?
Peace.
Peace, right. Shalom means peace. So by the way, shalem means completeness. So there's this idea, how do you achieve peace? Through being complete, right? If everything is fulfilled and complete, then there's peace. All right. So shalom is peace. Sim shalom is like make peace, grant peace, give peace, something like that. Sim shalom. And then Oseh shalom is pretty much synonymous with sim shalom. Make peace. Oseh. Okay.
Oseh.
Oseh shalom. And probably some of you have heard the song, Oseh shalom. Uyah shalom. Ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru imru amen. Yaseh shalom. You know,
Yes, it's shalom. Yes, I heard that song.
it's one of the first songs that most people wrote. It's very nice. The idea is very nice, and it's simple to learn. Okay, line 8, which is Shemona, is 8. Shemona, like Shemona Esrei. Okay, line 8. Yisrael.
Israel.
B'nai Yisrael.
Hey, Israel.
Eretz. Yisrael.
Eretz. Israel.
Israel.
Okay, so means people. So Yisrael is the Israelite people or the Jewish people. B'nai Yisrael in the Torah usually means Israelite, although literally it means sons of Israel, in other words, sons of Jacob or descendants of Jacob. Right, Jacob had 2 names, Jacob, and then after he fought with the angel, his name was changed to Israel. So B'nai, in Judaism, we have a belief that we descend from Jacob, right? The B'nai Yisrael, B'nai Yisrael, is literally sons of Israel, but we in the Torah it is translated as Israelites. And Eretz Israel, what is Eretz Israel?
The land of Israel.
Right, good. The land of Israel. How much time do we have? Okay, I need to end a little early. All right, page 75, top of the page. Okay. So I see you have to make sure that you get the right consonant. Well, the first line's pretty easy. Would anybody like to volunteer to read line 1 on 75? If you know the vowel sounds, it shouldn't be too bad. Would anybody like to volunteer?
It's easy. It's a sha, she, se, no, se.
If they're all shin, right?
Shin, yes. Shin.
Can you do it one more time?
Okay, I think I'm confusing with the 4th one. I said sha, she, se, and she.
Nachon. Woo. That was good.
Mm.
Lizette, did you want to do number 2?
Okay. We say, so, sa.
Okay. You know, it was very, very good. The 3rd one's confusing because it has a dot over and a dot under. So the dot under E and the dot over tells us that it's S. So it's very confusing having those 2 dots. But the one And sometimes a dot over can mean O, right? But we know that the dot over is just part of the consonant because there's a vowel under as well, right? So if there's something under, we know that that's going to be the vowel. So it's C. C. Okay. Very good, though. You got 4 out of 5. That's very good. Oh, line 3, they're a little harder. I'm up myself, but I'm going to read them and you can echo me. Shesha,
Shesha.
Sas,
Sas.
Yes.
Shaba,
Saba. Shaba.
Sara,
Sara.
Sarah.
Rash.
Rash.
Okay, line 4. Lasim,
Lasim.
Lasim.
Somea.
Somea.
Good. Kodesh,
Kodesh.
Kodesh.
Rosh,
Rosh.
Simcha.
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 Okay, and then line 5. La asot,
La asot.
Asot.
she asa.
Se
Asa.
sa.
Let's do that one again. She asa.
She
Asa.
La shevet.
La shevet.
Ose
Ose.
So.
achash verosh.
Ahashverosh.
Hashverosh.
Who is Achash verosh? Who is Achash verosh?
The Persian king?
King Xerxes.
Yes, and he was the very foolish king in what story that we recently read?
Esther.
In the
Purim.
in the book of Esther on Purim. He is the foolish king in that story. That is portrayed in that story, right? Achashverosh. We don't give him the sort of kavod of his classical Achashverosh. And when you hear people mangling it in English, it's actually, I think, easier to say it in Hebrew. Achashverosh is easier than saying Achasveros or whatever people say in English. Okay. All right, reading rules. Some dots do double duty. They indicate the vowel sound O and whether the letter is making an S or shin sound. Practice reading these words. Okay, without giving it away. The first word on the right, is the dot over that consonant a vowel? Does it have a vowel sound?
Yes.
Yes. So what's the word? Can you read the word?
Moshe.
Right,
Shank.
Moshe.
Oh no.
That's okay. I thought you said it. I thought you said Moshe. And who is Moshe?
Moses.
Moses.
Moses. Moses. Okay. All right. In between the lamed and the final letter in the second word, there is a dot. What function does that dot have?
An O and a sh sound.
Right. It's doing double duty there. Can you read that word?
Yes, it is shalosh.
Shalosh. Nachon. And does anybody know what number shalosh is?
3.
3. Tov ma'od. 3. Achat, shtayim, shalosh. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Third word. What function is that dot over the consonant in the third word?
Nason, nason.
Nas.
I think I heard a few people say it. It has to be doing double duty as part of the consonant and the vowel, because otherwise the sin doesn't have a vowel. It's okay to have a silent aleph at the end of the word, but the sin doesn't have a vowel, right? If the sin, it could have a silent shva underneath, but it doesn't. So we know it needs another vowel. So it's na, so, na, so.
Naso.
Right. Right. Okay. Fourth word, the first letter has a vowel, right? So it's sa. First letter has a vowel, it's sa. But the second sin doesn't have a vowel. So it's going to have to use its own dot as a vowel. Sa, son. Sa, son. Okay. In the fifth word, the nun has a vowel, the shin has a vowel, the tub doesn't need a vowel, it's at the end of a word. You know, you can have a consonant without a vowel at the end of the word. So what's missing a vowel? The chet. What can our poor chet do? It needs a vowel. What should it do?
Make it an O after. So ne choshet.
Nachon, good for you. Right. It must borrow that dot from the shin. Nechoshet. Good. Okay. All right. Last word on the left. The sin does not have a vowel. The nun has a vowel. The other has a vowel, but the sin doesn't have a vowel. So what is it going to do?
Oh. Sonay.
Yes.
Sonai.
Sonay.
Sonai.
Sonay.
Sonai. When we have, but you were very close. We took the O from the sin and the I at the end. It would be just ah, but there's a yud. So if there's a yud after ah, it turns into I, like an I, like your
Ayin.
I. Right, like ayin. Good, like ayin. Son I. Son I.
So not only Shin and Sin can borrow the dot, but it also every other consonant.
They can, yes, they can. If if it's a shin, the consonant before can borrow the dot. Sin, I'm trying to think about this. If it's a sin, then the sin itself can borrow its own dot. And the consonant before it can borrow.
When we read prayer books that don't have vowels in it, are the sins and the sins kind of letting you know what you should be pronouncing it as? Because a lot of the time I do see Hebrew without the vowels on it, and I don't see how you would possibly read that without just knowing what the word is.
Oh, okay. Well, if you look at a prayer book, it will have vowels, but look at a Talmud or a Mishnah, you know, a sort of higher level book, you know, for higher level studying. There are versions of those books that don't have vowels. Oops, you know what? I have to go. I have to start letting people into the synagogue. We're
Okay.
having-
Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you.
great
Bye.
Pesach. I know some of you are coming to our Seder, Zoom Seder, which makes me really happy. Please, if you want to lead anything or do a reading in the Seder, please let Rabbi Morgen know. We would love to have. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.